Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Rock Harbor Church Prophecy Update. It's our desire to bring the events that are happening in the world from a biblical perspective and also a prophetic perspective. So thanks for joining us today. What we want to talk about this week is what is termed the evangelical deep state. We've seen that being talked about in politics, that we realize there's a shadow government, there's a deep state going on in politics, but what some Christians don't realize is that there's an evangelical deep state as well. They're the ones controlling the narrative. They're the ones setting the tone. And those pastors and seminaries and Christian leaders who simply put their finger in the wind and test where the wind's blowing, simply just follow these people's leads, not realizing there's something insidious behind it. There's something going on behind why the churches are going into apostasy, why the churches are pushing social justice and social gospel. There's a reason for it. So there's two levels I want you to think about. There's one level of people knowing what they're doing, and then the second level is pastors, Christian leaders, seminaries who are watching the trends and just going with the trends. They're ignorant of what's happening, but they just go with the trends. And they take their churches in places they shouldn't be taking them. And this is why you're seeing a lot of churches practice social justice, social gospel, racial reparations, being sympathetic to LGBTQ, not having them to repent or anything, open borders, things like that. That's all going on for a reason. So let's take a step back and understand what's happening. First of all, the evangelical deep state is being bribed by money to do this and to promote these unbiblical things, to cause American Christianity to turn leftwards instead of being conservative and Bible-oriented. They're now turning towards Marxism, socialism, communism, and whatnot. So there's been a hard left turn because of the evangelical deep state, who is bribing or being bribed by outside forces and given money to promote non-biblical things. Now, take a further step back and see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is, as you know, in prophecy, that the whore of Babylon is forming. What we call the one world religion, the one world government, the one world economic system. So if you look in Scripture in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, Isaiah 13 and 14, and you see Jeremiah 50:51, you're going to see that the whore of Babylon is not simply a religious movement. She has a three-legged stool. And that three-legged stool not only includes religion, which you're seeing now that push towards a one-world religion, inclusivism, pluralism, all roads lead to God, ecumenical movements of people joining forces together to cure common cause issues like homelessness, illiteracy, things of that nature. So there is the religious aspect, but the other legs of the stool include politics. And you'll see that the whore of Babylon makes deals with the kings of the world. That's talking about politics. And then the last aspect of the whore of Babylon, when you look at all these chapters, Old and New Testament, about her, is that she also is involved in economics. Let me throw in one more chapter, is Zechariah chapter 5. It talks about this whore being taken over to the land of Shinar, and that she has a lead lid on an ephah, and she's inside of an ephah. That represents her connection to economics. And you'll see the economics also in Revelation 18. So, to understand things and how the whore is working her system, she's working it through religion, she's working it through politics, and she's working it through economics. That's the three-legged stool of the whore of Babylon. And of course, if you read Revelation 18:3, all three are named here. It'll say, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Notice it says all nations, or if you want to term that, all peoples. This is referring to the religious aspect of the whore of Babylon. And then notice in this other phrase, the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. The kings of the earth represent the politicians, the presidents of countries and the dictators and whatnot out there in the world. That's who the kings of the earth are. So that's the politics. And then it says, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. That's the third economic aspect of the whore of Babylon. So even in Revelation 18:3, it shows us all three elements. Okay? So, what you're noticing in that text is that these people, these nations, these kings, and these merchants, or the business owners, are bargaining with her. Okay? They are taking what she gives and they commit fornication with her for something else, for what she gives them. And what you see, she's given them is luxury items, or you can term this money. They have become rich through the abundance of her luxury, okay? So she trades with them money, okay? And whether that's politics, economics, or just people in general, in churches or whatnot, money is a major temptation for a lot of people. And again, as Paul mentioned, it's the love of money that is the root of all kinds of evils. I'll give you money if you do what I want you to do, if you say what I want you to say, and you promote my ideals versus the Bible's ideals and the Bible's principles. So she's bargaining. And a lot of people now are taking her money. And they do it sometimes to avoid persecution, or they do it for the power she gives, and also to make themselves wealthy. Well, as you know, she's forming. And you and I have been watching the one world religion, one world government, one world economic system form right in front of our very eyes. And it's continuing to form every day. And we're watching the world sell out to this, okay? That's why America has turned leftwards, and especially in its younger generation. The millennials, the majority of them, a good majority of them, are turning left. They like socialism. They like Marxism. Why? Well, 50 years of indoctrination in our public schools and universities have done that to them. But all of that to say is that's coming from the whore of Babylon. She's got them. And you're watching that in the world, but it's also happening in our churches, in our denominations, in our seminaries, and our Christian institutions. They're selling out. And so now all of a sudden, these conservative institutions and churches and denominations that you once knew to be conservative are not anymore. They have been infiltrated from people who have done a deal with the whore of Babylon and are now promoting her values through the churches and denominations and seminaries. So she's on the move, and she's worming her way into the churches, and she's alive and well in the churches. And again, why would these churches do this? Again, they're selling out for money. That's what it's all about. So let's look at a couple examples, okay? Let's look at a secular example of how she works, okay? Then we'll look at how she's infiltrating and bribing the church, and how churches and denominations are being paid off. Okay, so let's look at this one secular example. This is from Now the End Begins by Jeffrey Grider, and you can find this on Yahoo Sports, or it's in a number of outlets, but it's about LeBron James. You might have heard the latest controversy of what this guy has done. It's probably the worst thing he's ever done in his career. And he shamefully sided with communist China against pro-democracy Hong Kong and the freedom fighters there that are trying to preserve their life and liberty and not have China get involved in their lives and extradite them. I'll explain in a little bit what's really going on. But he sided with communist China to preserve his lucrative MBA Chinese income stream. So let me first bring you up to speed on what's actually happening with the Hong Kong protests so you understand what's happening. The protests were initially focused on a bill that would make it easier to extradite people to China from a semi-autonomous city like Hong Kong, okay? The law would allow the extradition of suspects to mainland China for the very first time, okay? Under the amended law, those accused of offenses punishable by 7 years or more in prison could be extradited. The new legislation would give Hong Kong's leader, known as the chief executive, authority to approve extradition requests after review by the courts. Well, Hong Kong's legislature, the Legislative Council, would not have any oversight over the extradition process. So many Hong Kongers fear the law would be used by authorities in China to target political enemies, and that would be the end of a one country, two system policy, which would erode the civil rights enjoyed by Hong Kong's residents. As you know, China has often used allegations of non-political crimes to target government critics. And there are fears that Hong Kong officials would not be able to reject Beijing's requests. Legal professionals have also expressed concern over the rights of those sent across the border to be tried. The conviction rate in China is about as high as 99%. Arbitrary detentions, torture, and denial of legal representation of one's choosing are also common. So the Houston general manager then came out a week ago, Daryl Morey, came out in support of the protests movement that's happening in Hong Kong against China. And rightfully so. We would all agree with Hong Kong and the residents there and support them because all they want is freedom. They don't want communist China putting them in prison because they oppose the government. Well, Daryl Morey got a lot of backlash, believe it or not, from the Rockets owner, Tillman Fertitta, and the Chinese government. And Chinese business interests have rocked the franchise and the NBA itself. This also included LeBron James, who is, if you probably don't know this, maybe you do, he's a rabid leftist. He's also a rabid anti-Semitic person and who is protected by this left-wing elite millionaires here in the United States who are doing deals with China. So LeBron James came out and told reporters that the Rockets general manager, Daryl Morey, wasn't educated on Hong Kong and should have kept his mouth shut. No, I think it's LeBron James that needs to keep his mouth shut. He doesn't know. He's uneducated, and he's bought into this leftist connection with China. James told reporters, so many people could have been harmed, not only financially, but physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Yeah, right. LeBron James is worried about his pocketbook. That's what he's worried about. So he came out and said, well, we need to be careful what we tweet, what we say, and what we do. Well, he needs to be careful because he's showing his true colors. He's showing you what he's all about and how he's selling out to Chinese money. See, LeBron James and the NBA are turning a blind eye to the Chinese, turning a blind eye to Chinese repression, and they don't have any love for the repressed people of Hong Kong in a fight for freedom from the brutal oppression of communist China. That's what they don't know. So why is James so against the Hong Kong Revolution? I thought he's an American. I thought he's for freedom. Because if he supports it, he will risk angering communist China and seeing his lucrative millions dry up overnight. Now you know what type of person LeBron James is. He is bought and paid for by shoe companies like Nike and Adidas who control the NBA. This is the reason why they are supporting communist China. Nike and Adidas and other shoe companies are in trade agreements with communist China. China is the biggest violator of human freedom and inalienable rights, such as free speech. And yet they are kowtowing down to these Chinese governments because of the money they're being paid. And I like what Republican Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska said to LeBron and the NBA. He said, "You're parroting communist propaganda. China is running torture camps, and you know it." And he said this referring to China's reported incarceration of up to 1 million Muslim people in prison-like camps. You probably heard about that. Well, let me show you a clip from Jason Whitlock, who connects the dots on how Nike influences the NBA and the athletic apparel company's relationship with China.
Jason Whitlock is the host of Speak for Yourself on Fox Sports 1, and he joins us tonight. So, Jason, this seems inexcusable behavior from the NBA. What's your view of it?
Well, I think the cultural impact that China's influence over a great sport, a great American sport like basketball, is just now being exposed, and just how dependent the NBA is on the Chinese economy and Chinese money to put on the appearance of how great the league is doing. Without the Chinese money and without, because you really have to understand the shoe companies, Nike, Adidas, they run American basketball from the high school level all the way to the pros, and the shoe companies are dependent on the China market. And that's where all of this is coming from. You see NBA players constantly over the summer during their offseason running to China to do the bidding of their shoe companies and to sell their shoes in the China market. And so the NBA is really being exposed as not nearly as much of American business as it is a global business, with China perhaps having more influence over it than even America.
Which is shocking, given that, of course, and it's shocking because I don't think most people know that,
no.
But also shocking given that the NBA was, of course, incubated in this country, wouldn't have been possible in any other. Basketball was invented in Springfield, Massachusetts, in a YMCA. It's the most American of all sports. And I don't know that there's any basketball arena that wasn't subsidized by American taxpayers. So, like, how could they possibly take this position?
Well, Tucker, the cultural impact of this, and what a great teachable moment it is for most American citizens. When people start talking about being a global citizen, I don't think people really understand what that means for American culture. And I think for a lot of the everyday, typical American sports fan, this is an educational experience. This is what people have been talking about. We can't let our corporations, our country being totally driven by China, because it's driving our culture. These basketball players, LeBron James, James Harden actually apologized on behalf of Daryl Morey to the Chinese government. We're apologizing to a communist government, and then we have athletes here and coaches like Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich that rail against our government. We're the bad guys in the minds of these NBA players and coaches, and their little parade of being so woke. All of it, to me, is at the behest of the shoe companies. They're doing the bidding of the shoe companies and protecting China and demonizing us and our culture and dramatically changing our culture, because these athletes are young. And I'm not giving them an excuse, but they're young.
Right.
Many of them didn't go to college or only spent a year or two in college. They don't understand how they're being used and played to promote a communist, a Marxist agenda. They have no idea that their actions and a lot of the things they're promoting, this victim mentality and all the identity politics and, everything in America's racist, all of that, it's all a scam by the shoe companies. Look how socially aware we are. Look how we fight against injustice. No, you're actually doing a marketing ploy to pretend you have a social conscience, and you're actually doing the bidding of the communist regime in China.
Yeah, maybe the single most racist government in the world. It's literally an ethno-state, and here's the socially conscious NBA sucking up. Very quick, it's a little shocking to me that Kerr, of all people, who never hesitates to give his opinion, is often lauded for it, can't manage to say that he takes Hong Kong's side?
Tucker, these guys can rail against our government, our president, and be applauded for it. They don't have the courage to speak out against a communist government, all kinds of human rights violations. It's the epitome of hypocrisy and cowardice.
It really is. And thank you for putting it in context with the shoe companies. I think that's the most interesting thing I've heard in a long time. Jason Whitlock, good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
So now you see the problem. James, who has a lucrative lifetime endorsement deal with Nike, which does big business in China, is not going to speak against the Chinese. LeBron, Steve Kerr, and others, and the NBA itself kowtows to Nike and Adidas, who kowtows to the Chinese Communist government. They are all sellouts for money, and that money they're receiving is coming directly from Communist China. And they're doing the bidding for Communist China. That's why they won't speak out against what China is doing to Hong Kong. And again, let's take a step backwards and see the bigger picture. It's not just simply money coming from China. It's money coming from the Whore of Babylon. That's what it is. The NBA, LeBron James, Stephen Kerr, all these guys cannot make moral or ethical decisions because they're on the take. When you get money from big money, we're talking big money, from these types of situations, whether it's Nike or Chinese government, it erases their morality. Not even, we're not expecting these people to have any sense of morality anyway, but if they did, it erases that. They want the money. And you have to ask these people how much money is enough, and it's not. That's what the Whore of Babylon uses. That's what she does to con people to carry out her bidding. And the NBA and LeBron and the rest of them are doing that. Okay, so now let's move from what's happening in the secular world to the church, to Christian institutions here in North America. So let's talk about that. Well, J.D. Hall from Pulpit and Pen wrote some good articles about this. And again, it's not an endorsement of J.D. Hall's Reformed theology or his eschatology or his Calvinism, but he does a great job in documenting this. It's worthy to note what his research found out. He notes on Pulpit and Pen, if you're wondering why so many evangelical organizations are getting so-called woke, and we talk about woke to social justice issues, wonder no more, he says. In regard to evangelical or Christian institutions, we'll remind you that Soros is renting evangelicals. J.D. Hall, on his website, has documented and compiled a list that shows various organizations that are funded, fully funded or partially funded by George Soros. And although nearly 200 organizations are listed, like the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, Media Matters for America, MoveOn.org, the NAACP, the National Council of La Raza, Planned Parenthood, Social Justice Leadership, Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Tides Foundation. He notes those. He also notes the Christian organizations that are getting partially funded or fully funded by George Soros. And George Soros, as you know, is trying to change America, and he's trying to do it not only through these secular organizations, but through Christianity. So, for instance, let me name a few organizations. CREW, which was formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ. This organization has been promoting social justice to college students for the last several years. Soros has been funding the organization since 2012. Catholics for Choice. This nominally Catholic organization supports women's right to abortion on demand. Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good is another organization. This political nonprofit group is dedicated to generating support from the Catholic community for left-wing candidates, causes, and legislation. How about this? The other group, the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, ran by Russell Moore. This group is an entity of the Southern Baptist Convention. It is closely aligned both with Sojourners and the National Association of Evangelicals on several Soros projects, like the Evangelical Immigration Table. This organization does not report its financial statements beyond a small group of trustees. The organization operates significantly beyond the amount designated by the Southern Baptist General Fund, and a portion of that designated giving comes from Media Fund, which is a Soros corporation that pays for mass media projects of like-minded institutions. That Ethics Religious Liberty Commission has been pushing social justice, white privilege, open borders, every leftist, Marxist propaganda item they have been pushing. How about the Evangelical Immigration Table? This organization was founded by the National Immigration Forum and is headed up by the Ethics Religious Liberty Commission I just mentioned of the SBC and Sojourners. How about this organization, National Association of Evangelicals? This organization long predates Soros, but it is funded in part by Soros' Migration Policy Institute, which supports its efforts to decriminalize illegal immigration and streamline the process by which migrants can apply for taxpayer assistance. How about Sojourners? You might have heard this. This is an evangelical Christian ministry that preaches radical left-wing politics. Jim Wallace is the head of this. During the 1980s, it championed communist revolution in Central America and chastised U.S. policymakers for their tendency to assume the very worst about Soviet counterparts. More recently, Sojourners has taken up the cause of environmental activism, opposed welfare reform as a mean-spirited Republican agenda, and mounted a defense of affirmative action. How about the Gospel Coalition? This organization receives dark money through Soros and through Soros's numerous grant-funded shell charities that keep the organization pushing evangelicalism to the left, trying to turn a key conservative voting demographic against the GOP. Many of you have seen a hard left turn in American evangelicalism, and as JD reports, this is why. This is usually coming from neo-Calvinists also, who are leading the way in Marxist thought and leading the way in globalism and social justice. The Marxist Globalist Alliance has been intentionally buying its way into Reformed America evangelicalism. George Soros has been financing the Evangelical Immigration Table, on which serves the ERLC's Russell Moore, talking about the Ethics Religious Liberty Commission, referring to Russell Moore, who has also promoted Soros material from the SBC social media platforms. Also, billionaire James Raidy, who is also a globalist and a Marxist and a longtime friend of Bill and Hillary Clinton and their ally, has been using his money among American evangelicals and primarily among Reformed evangelicals. So he, like Soros, acts like a sugar daddy to these evangelical organizations. And that is why social justice, economic and cultural Marxism, and open borders and radical environmentalism of the Gospel Coalition, the ERLC, and the new Calvinist organizations is significantly being influenced by these types of guys. That's why they're pushing their agenda. Christian leaders like Russell Moore, Ligon Duncan, Tim Keller, and many, many others, and these organizations that I just named, the Gospel Coalition, the ERLC, partnering with the Acton Institute, who urges Christians to disengage from culture, from historical Christian views on moral issues like gay marriage, LGBT inclusion, immigration reform, drug legalization, and etc., 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 while they are instead expected to seek social justice as the new approach to all missions for the church. Okay? That's instead of the Great Commission, this is their mission now. All these items I mentioned. This, my friends, is the evangelical deep state. The rest of the evangelical world put their finger in the wind, like I mentioned, and see where it's blowing, and then they follow the latest fads or trends. So, as you know, surveys show that evangelicals don't read their Bibles very much. So that makes it easier to deceive them. So the person sitting in the pews who goes to churches but doesn't understand their Bible will be deceived by this because it all sounds good. So they will be told false things like Jesus was a so-called illegal immigrant, and they will believe that. And it's like, no, you don't understand the Bible. Jesus wasn't an illegal immigrant. Jesus wasn't a refugee. So you can't apply modern legal terms to a pre-modern world era. That's a theological error. But they do that, and the people just go with it because they don't know their Bibles. So these well-funded evangelicals who are getting money from Soros are selling out the truth for money. They are now promoting what these lefties want them to promote. Identity politics, racial reparations, LGBT, white privilege, open borders, climate care, and all this other nonsense. In fact, in research cited by Michelle Malkin in her new book, Open Borders, the National Association of Evangelicals World Relief received $215 million over the last decade to aid refugees. Malkin writes that this figure is 65% of the entity's budget for that time period. Also, World Relief's content on immigration is promoted by the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. In an article posted in June 29, 2019, titled 5 Ways Your Church Can Help Immigrant and Refugee Communities, World Relief has mentioned, along with the North American Mission Board and the ERLC, as a useful resource for immigration. That's why they want open borders. The ERLC has redefined the Great Commission when it said in a tweet, we are fulfilling the Great Commission when we welcome people from other nations into our country. What? That's not the Great Commission. The Great Commission is found in the Scriptures, and it doesn't include doing immigration. That's not what it's talking about. Make disciples of all nations. It talks about evangelizing, disciple making, things of that nature. It doesn't talk about immigration. What are they doing? But do Christians come back at this and say, hey man, you guys are wrong? No, because they don't know it either. They're willfully ignorant. And if you're willfully ignorant as a Christian, you're going to be taken advantage of by these types of people. They are false teachers. So in essence, they're taking money from the whore of Babylon to promote the religion of the whore of Babylon. And many of them don't know what they're doing. Many of them don't care. So what's our admonition? Understand that this is going on. There's a deep state in Christianity. We, as the remnant, can't sell out for money. They'll tell these guys who run these seminaries, hey, you want a new library? I'll give you millions of dollars. Just promote social justice. Hey, you guys want this new activity center? Just promote social justice. Guys, don't sell out. Don't sell out Christ. Don't sell out the Bible for money. Because that's what they're going to do to bribe you. They're going to make you compromise your Christian values for money. And a lot of Christians right now are selling out Christ for this money. Stand for the truth. Take it on the chin. You're going to be marginalized. You're going to be talked about, but that's okay. You stand for the truth and don't compromise. Well, that brings us to our conclusion today. Thanks for joining us, and watch us next week as we discern the signs of the times and see things through the lens of Scripture. And remember what Jesus said. When you see these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. God bless you. We'll see you next week.